You're in the wrong line, sweetheart. Economy is back there. Those were the last words Officer Greg Sterling should have said to the woman in the cashmere coat. He thought he saw an easy target, someone out of place in the first-class priority lane at JFK. He thought he could bully her, humiliate her, and toss her out of the terminal to boost his own ego. He didn't know that the woman he was handcuffing wasn't just a passenger. She was the wife of the man who owned the very airline Sterling was standing in front of. Watch what happens when arrogance meets absolute power, and karma comes knocking with a termination letter. Dr. Nia Calloway adjusted the strap of her vintage Birkin bag, checking the time on her Cartier tank watch. It was 6:45 a.m. at JFK International Airport, and the chaos of the holiday rush was already vibrating through the terminal floors. Nia, however, wasn't part of the chaos. She was standing in the velvet-roped sanctuary of the Stratos Airlines first-class check-in, a quiet oasis of beige carpets and soft lighting. She was exhausted. After a 48-hour shift performing emergency pediatric surgery at Mount Sinai, all she wanted was to get to London, meet her husband Richard, and sleep for 12 hours in a lie-flat seat. She wore oversized sunglasses, a comfortable cream-colored tracksuit, and a long camel coat. She didn't look like a runway model or a celebrity. She looked like a tired woman trying to get home. "Next, please," the desk agent called out warmly. Nia stepped forward, passport in hand, but before she could reach the counter, a heavy hand slammed onto the velvet rope in front of her, blocking her path. "Hold it right there." The voice was gravelly and dripping with condescension. Nia paused and looked up. Standing there was Officer Greg Sterling. He wasn't technically police. He was private security contracted by the airport authority, but he wore the badge and the gun belt like he was the sheriff of Nottingham. He was a large man, thick around the neck, with a buzz cut that did nothing to hide the redness of his face. He'd been patrolling Terminal 4 for 3 years, and in that time he'd developed a reputation for being aggressive with anyone he deemed suspicious. "Excuse me," Nia said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. "Is there a problem, officer?" Sterling looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her comfortable tracksuit and the way her hair was tied up in a messy bun. He sneered. "Yeah, there's a problem. This is the Priority 1 lane. Stratos Airlines elite members and first class only." "I am aware," Nia said calmly, stepping around him. "I'm checking in." Sterling stepped into her personal space, the smell of stale coffee and mints radiating from him. "I don't think you heard me. This isn't the line for upgrades, and it isn't the line to ask for directions. Economy check-in is downstairs near the bus drop-off. You need to turn around." Nia sighed a long, weary exhalation. She didn't have the energy for this. She really didn't. "Officer, I have a ticket. If you'll let me pass, the agent can verify it. I verify who gets in this line." Sterling snapped his hand, moving to rest on his belt, a subtle intimidation tactic he loved to use. "And I'm telling you, you don't fit the profile. We've had a lot of scammers trying to sneak into the lounge lately. People who can't afford it, cluttering up the space for the real customers." Behind the desk, the Stratos agent, a young woman named Sarah, looked nervous. She waved a hand. "Officer Sterling, it's okay, I can just check her." "Quiet, Sarah," Sterling barked without looking at her. "I'm doing my job, securing the perimeter." He turned his glare back to Nia. "Let me see your ID and your ticket. Now." Nia felt the heat rising in her chest. It wasn't fear. It was the sharp, cold anger of someone who had worked twice as hard to get half as far, only to be stopped by a man with a badge and a bias. She reached into her bag. "Don't reach!" Sterling shouted, causing heads to turn all across the terminal. Slowly, hands where I can see them. A hush fell over the check-in area. A businessman in a grey suit lowered his newspaper. A family of 4 stopped arguing over luggage. They were all watching the black woman in the tracksuit being treated like a criminal. Nia froze her eyes, narrowing behind her sunglasses. She slowly pulled out her phone and her passport. "I'm getting my boarding pass, officer. You need to lower your voice." "I'll lower my voice when you get out of my line." Sterling spat. He snatched the passport from her hand, his rough fingers grazing her skin. He opened it, flipping through the pages with aggressive carelessness. "Nia Calloway." "Sure. And where exactly did you get the money for a first-class ticket to London lottery winner, rapper's girlfriend?" Nia took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dark and piercing. "I'm a neurosurgeon, Officer Sterling, and I bought that ticket with my own money. Now give me my passport back." Sterling laughed a short, barking sound. "A neurosurgeon? Right. And I'm the King of England. You know it's a crime to lie to security personnel." "It's not a crime to exist while black in a first-class line," Nia said, her voice dropping an octave deadly calm. "You are making a mistake. A very Sterling's face turned a shade of purple. He hated being challenged, especially by women, and specifically by women like her. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl. "Listen to me. You're going to take your bag. You're going to walk away, and you're going to go stand in the economy line where you belong. If you say one more word to me, I'm not just kicking you out of the line. I'm detaining you for disorderly conduct. Do you understand?" Nia didn't blink. She looked at the name tag on his chest. G. Sterling, Lead Security. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. Sterling snapped. The calm defiance on Nia's face was like gasoline on the fire of his insecurity. In his mind, he was the protector of the airport, the gatekeeper of the elite, and this woman was challenging his authority in front of an audience. "That's it," Sterling shouted. "Step out of the line. You are being detained." He grabbed Nia's upper arm. His grip was tight, painful. "Get your hands off me!" Nia shouted, instinctively pulling back. "Resisting!" Sterling yelled, playing to the crowd. "She's resisting. I need backup at the Stratus counter." He spoke into his shoulder radio, his voice frantic, fabricating a threat that didn't exist. "Subject is belligerent, refusing commands, possible, fraudulent documents." He yanked her hard, pulling her out of the velvet ropes. Nia stumbled her ankle, twisting in her boots. Her vintage Birkin bag, a gift from Richard for their 10th anniversary, slipped from her shoulder and hit the floor, spilling its contents. A stethoscope, a heavy medical textbook, a diamond tennis bracelet she'd taken off for surgery, and her phone clattered across the polished tile. "Look at that," Sterling sneered, pointing at the expensive items. "Stolen goods. Did you rob a doctor's office before you came here?" "I am the doctor," Nia cried out, trying to reach for her phone. Sterling kicked the phone away, sliding it across the floor toward the wall. "Leave it. Hands behind your back." The Stratus agent. Sarah was now standing up, looking horrified. "Officer Sterling, please, you can't do this. That's—" "I said, shut it, Sarah." Sterling roared, spinning Nia around and slamming her against the check-in counter. The impact knocked the wind out of her. The cold marble pressed against her cheek. She felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around her wrists, biting into the delicate skin she used to save lives. "You are making a huge mistake," Nia gasped, pressing her face against the counter, to avoid having her arm twisted further. "My husband. Oh, here we go." Sterling laughed, tightening the cuffs one notch too tight on purpose. "Let me guess. Your husband is a lawyer, a judge? I've heard it all, lady. I don't care who your husband is. Unless he's the President of the United States, you're going to a holding cell." He hauled her up, spinning her around to face the terminal. A small crowd had gathered, many recording with their phones. Sterling puffed out his chest, feeling like a hero taking down a threat. "Folks, nothing to see here," Sterling announced loudly. "Just keeping the airport safe from fraudsters." Naya stood there humiliated. Her shoulder throbbed where he had grabbed her. Her wrists burned. But as the shock wore off, the steel in her spine returned. She saw her phone lying near the wall, the screen glowing. "I need my phone," Naya said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I have the right to make a call." "You have the right to remain silent," Sterling mocked her. "We'll process you downtown. Maybe then you'll learn some respect." Just then a man in a sharp blue suit came running from the administrative offices behind the check-in desk. It was Mr. Henderson, the terminal manager. He looked pale. "Officer Sterling." "What is going on here?" Henderson demanded, looking at Naya in cuffs. "Caught a live one, boss," Sterling said, grinning. "Tried to bypass security, fake ticket, posing as a doctor. Found stolen jewelry in her bag. She got physical, so I had to restrain her." Henderson looked at Naya, then at the spilled bag on the floor. He saw the name on the medical textbook, Dr. Naya Calloway. Henderson's face went from pale to ghost white. He looked at the manifest on the screen behind Sarah. The name on the VIP list was flashing: Calloway, NIA. Spouse, Richard Calloway, CEO, Stratos Group. "Sterling," Henderson whispered, his voice trembling. "Take those cuffs off. Now!" "What?" Sterling blinked, confused. "Boss, she resisted. She's a security risk." "She is not a security risk, you idiot," Henderson hissed, stepping closer so the crowd wouldn't hear, but loud enough for Sterling. "Do you know who that is?" "Yeah, some con artist named Naya." "That is Naya Calloway," Henderson said, sweat beading on his forehead. "As in Richard Calloway's wife." Sterling paused. The name Richard Calloway was famous. He was the billionaire mogul who had bought Stratos Airlines 3 years ago. He was known for being ruthless with business rivals and fiercely protective of his family. He practically owned this entire terminal. Sterling looked at Naya. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was looking at him with a gaze that promised absolute destruction. "You're lying," Sterling stammered, his confidence cracking. She looks like..." "Like what?" Naya asked, her voice cutting through the air like a scalpel. "Like I don't belong. Take them off," Henderson ordered, reaching for his own keys. "No," Nia said sharply, stepping back from Henderson. "Don't touch me." She looked directly at Sterling. "I want him to do it. And then I want him to pick up my phone. Because I'm going to call Richard. And I want Officer Sterling to be the one to tell him why his wife is in handcuffs." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Sterling swallowed hard. His throat felt dry. He looked at the phone on the floor. Look, Ma'am, if this is a misunderstanding." Sterling started his voice, losing its gravelly edge, replaced by a whining tone. "The misunderstanding was yours," Naya said. "The consequences will be mine to dish out. Pick up the phone." Officer Greg Sterling's hands were shaking. It was a subtle tremor at first, barely noticeable, but as he bent down to retrieve the smartphone from the dirty airport tile, his fingers fumbled. The screen was cracked, a spider web of glass fracturing the sleek display where his boot had kicked it. The crowd was dead silent. 50 people were watching, phones raised, recording every micro-expression. Sterling picked up the device. It was unlocked. The contact list was open. There was only one name on the screen, highlighted in the recent calls list. Richard, husband. "Call him," Naya commanded. She was still pressed against the counter, her hands bound behind her back, her chin held high despite the humiliation. "Put it on speaker." Henderson, the manager, looked like he was about to faint. "Sterling, for God's sake, just apologize and uncuff her." "No," Naya said, her voice turning icy. "He wanted to follow protocol. He wanted to verify my identity. Let him verify it." Sterling swallowed the lump in his throat. He pressed the call button. The line rang once, twice. The sound of the ringtone echoed through the silent terminal area on the speakerphone. Click. "Nia." The voice on the other end was deep, warm, and distinctly British. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar mergers. "Darling, you're late. I'm sitting in the Concorde lounge waiting for you. The pilot is holding the slot, but we need to board in 20 minutes. Where are you?" Sterling froze. The blood drained from his face so fast it left him dizzy. "He's here." Richard Calloway wasn't in London. He wasn't in a skyscraper in Manhattan. He was upstairs, literally 300 feet above their heads, in the VIP lounge. Sterling couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Hello." Richard's voice sharpened slightly. "Nia, is everything all right?" Nia leaned forward, speaking clearly toward the phone in Sterling's trembling hand. "Richard, I'm downstairs at check-in. I can't come up." "Why not?" Richard asked, the warmth instantly evaporating from his voice, replaced by a vigilant alertness. "Is there a queue?" "No," Naya said, locking eyes with Sterling. "I'm currently in handcuffs. I've been detained by a security officer named Greg Sterling. He says I don't fit the profile for first class. He kicked your phone, Richard, and he twisted my arm." The silence on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any scream. It lasted for 5 seconds. When Richard spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a lethal weight. "Who is holding the phone?" Sterling cleared his throat, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. Mr. Calloway?" "Sir, this is Officer Sterling. Listen to me very carefully." Richard interrupted. The sound of a chair scraping against a floor could be heard in the background, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps. "Do not speak, do not explain, and certainly do not touch my wife again. If she has a single bruise, I will spend every penny I have to ensure you never work a day in your life again. I am coming down." The call ended. Sterling stared at the phone. The call-ended screen faded to black, reflecting his own terrified face. "Uncuff her!" Henderson screamed, finally finding his voice. He rushed forward, shoving Sterling aside. "Give me the keys, you moron!" "No," Naya shouted, stepping back from Henderson. "He put them on. He takes them off. But not yet. I want Richard to see this." "Dr. Calloway, please," Henderson begged, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is a PR nightmare. We can resolve this quietly. I'll upgrade you to the private suite. I already own the private suite, Mr. Henderson," Naya reminded him. "I don't want an upgrade. I want justice." Sterling stood there, the keys to the handcuffs heavy in his pocket. He looked around at the crowd. The passengers weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him like he was a dead man walking. He had bullied the wrong woman. And now the elevator doors at the far end of the hall were dinging. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh that seemed deafening in the quiet terminal. Two men in dark suits stepped out first, Richard's personal security detail. They scanned the room with professional efficiency, their eyes landing immediately on the scene at the check-in counter. They moved to the sides, clearing a path. Then Richard Calloway walked out. He was a tall man, 6'3", wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than Sterling made in a year. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He walked with a terrifying, predatory grace. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Behind him trailed two uniformed NYPD officers, actual police, who had been stationed near the lounge and had followed the commotion. Richard walked straight past the velvet ropes, past the stunned passengers, past the trembling Henderson. He stopped 3 feet from Naya. He looked at the handcuffs on her wrists, then up at her face. He saw the red mark on her cheek where she had been pressed against the counter. He saw the dirt on her cream tracksuit. His jaw tightened a muscle, feathering in his cheek. He reached out and gently touched her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. "My shoulder is sore." Naya admitted, her voice finally trembling a little now that he was there. "And he broke the clasp on my bracelet." Richard turned slowly. He didn't look at Henderson. He didn't look at Sarah, the agent. He turned his gaze directly on Greg Sterling. Sterling involuntarily took a step back. He had faced angry drunks, unruly teenagers, and confused tourists. He had never faced a man who wielded power like a weapon. Richard looked at Sterling as if he were a stain on the floor that needed to be scrubbed away. "You must be Officer Sterling," Richard said. His voice was conversational, which made it all the more frightening. "Mr. Calloway, sir." "Look," Sterling stammered, holding up his hands. "It's a misunderstanding. She refused to show ID. She was resisting. I was just following protocol for the priority lane. We have to be careful, you know." "Anyone could walk in here." "Anyone," Richard repeated. "My wife is a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon. She has flown this airline 3 times a month for the last 4 years. And you think she looks like, what did you call her? A scammer." I didn't know who she was," Sterling pleaded. "She was dressed in, sweats. You thought a black woman in a tracksuit couldn't possibly belong in my first-class terminal?" Richard finished the sentence for him. "So you decided to physically assault her?" "I didn't assault her, I detained her." Sterling argued, his panic making him defensive. "She was belligerent." Richard turned to Sarah, the check-in agent, who was shrinking behind her computer monitor. "Sarah," Richard said gently, "I remember you. We sent you a gift basket when your daughter was born last year. Tell me the truth. Was my wife belligerent?" Sarah swallowed hard. She looked at Sterling, who was glaring at her silently, warning her to shut up. Then she looked at Naya, standing in handcuffs. She looked at the crowd, recording on their phones. "No, Mr. Calloway," Sarah said, her voice clear. "She wasn't. She tried to show her boarding pass. Officer Sterling blocked her. He insulted her. He called her sweetheart and told her to go to economy. When she tried to get her ID, he grabbed her." "Liar," Sterling shouted. "She reached for a weapon." "She reached for a passport," Sarah yelled back, finding her courage. "You knocked her bag down. You kicked her phone." Richard nodded slowly. He turned back to Sterling. He extended his hand. "Keys." Sterling hesitated. "Sir, I can't just release a detainee without processing." "You are not the police," Richard said, stepping closer. "You are a private security contractor employed by a firm that I pay. You have exactly 3 seconds to give me those keys, or I will have these officers behind me arrest you for kidnapping." The 2 NYPD officers behind Richard stepped forward, hands resting on their belts. They didn't look friendly. Sterling's bravado shattered. He dug into his pocket, his fingers fumbling, and pulled out the small silver keys. He dropped them into Richard's open palm. Richard didn't unlock the cuffs immediately. He handed the keys to one of the NYPD officers. "Officer," Richard said, "would you please release my wife, and then I would like to file a formal complaint against this man for assault battery and unlawful imprisonment." "Absolutely, Mr. Calloway," the NYPD officer said. He stepped forward, unlocked the cuffs, and Naya rubbed her wrists, grimacing. Richard immediately wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, kissing her forehead. Then he looked at Henderson. "Mr. Henderson?" "Yes, sir," Henderson squeaked. "Why is this man still wearing a badge that allows him access to my terminal?" The question hung in the air. Henderson looked at Sterling, then back at Richard. I will handle the disciplinary paperwork immediately, Mr. Calloway. We'll do a review." "No," Richard said. "You misunderstand me. I don't want a review. I want him gone. Now." Sterling's face turned red. "You can't just fire me. I have a union. I have rights. I was doing my job. Your job," Richard said, his voice rising so the entire crowd could hear, "is to ensure the safety and comfort of our passengers. Instead, you profiled a woman, based on her appearance, assaulted her, destroyed her property, and humiliated her. You are a liability, Mr. Sterling. And you are a bully." Richard pulled out his own phone. He dialed a number and put it to his ear. "Yes, get me the head of security for the Port Authority, and get the CEO of Titan Security on the line. Yes, wake him up. I don't care what time it is." Sterling watched in horror as Richard began to dismantle his life in real time. "Hello, David. It's Richard Calloway." "Yes, I'm standing in Terminal 4. I want your contract with Titan Security terminated effective immediately. No, I don't care about the cancellation fee. I'll pay it. I want them out of my airport by noon." "Why?" "Because your lead officer, a Mr. Sterling, just handcuffed my wife because he didn't like her outfit." Richard paused, listening to the voice on the other end. He looked at Sterling with cold, dead eyes. "Yes, that's right. I also want him blacklisted. If he works security at a mall kiosk in this state again, I will be very upset. Thank you." Richard hung up. He looked at Sterling. "You're fired," Richard said simply. "But that's the least of your problems." He turned to the NYPD officers. "Officers, my wife would like to press charges." Naya stepped forward. She picked up her cracked phone and her medical textbook. She looked at Sterling, who was now trembling violently. The arrogance was gone. The bully was gone. All that was left was a scared man who realized he had pushed the wrong person. "He assaulted me," Naya said firmly to the police. "He twisted my wrist, causing injury. He destroyed my personal property, and he detained me against my will without cause." "That's a lie," Sterling shouted, but his voice was weak. "I suspected fraud." "We have cameras, Greg," Henderson said quietly, pointing to the dome camera directly above the check-in desk. "Everything is recorded, audio and video." The color drained from Sterling's face completely. He knew what the tapes would show. They would show him sneering. They would show him initiating contact. They would show Nia being calm while he lost control. One of the NYPD officers stepped up to Sterling. "Greg Sterling, turn around and place your hands behind your back." "What?" "No. You can't be serious." Sterling backed away, bumping into the velvet rope he had used to block Naya earlier. "You are under arrest for assault and battery," the officer said, pulling his own handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the ratchet clicking was the same sound Sterling had used on Naya 10 minutes ago. The crowd, which had been silent, erupted. Someone shouted, "That's what you get!" Another person clapped. As the cuffs locked around Sterling's wrists, he looked at Naya. "Please," he whispered, desperation taking over. "Miss Calloway, Dr. Calloway, I have a mortgage. I have kids. Please don't do this. I'll apologize. I'll do anything." Naya looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear he tried to inflict on others every day. She felt a twinge of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the memory of his hand squeezing her arm, of the way he had kicked her phone like it was trash. "You should have thought about your kids before you decided to traumatize someone else's mother," Naya said softly. "The line for the police cruiser is outside Mr. Sterling. Economy class seating only." Richard took Nia's hand. "Come on, darling. Let's get some ice for that wrist. We have a plane to catch." He turned to Henderson. "Have someone collect her bag and the spilled items. Bring them to the plane. And Henderson, yes, Mr. Calloway, if I ever see a passenger treated like this in my terminal again, it won't be the security guard I fire. It will be you." "Understood, sir." Henderson gulped. Richard and Naya walked toward the elevator, stepping over the velvet rope. They didn't look back as the police marched a weeping Greg Sterling out of the terminal, past the very people he used to terrorize. But the story wasn't over. The video of the incident had already been uploaded to Twitter. By the time Naya and Richard landed in London, the world would know Greg Sterling's name. And karma was just getting warmed up. By the time the Stratos Airlines jet touched down at Heathrow Airport 7 hours later, the world had fundamentally changed for everyone involved. Naya had spent the flight in the quiet sanctuary of the private suite, icing her bruised wrist and sipping herbal tea, while Richard held her hand, refusing to let go. They were disconnected from the ground, floating in a bubble of calm. But below them, the internet was burning. A passenger named David Chen, the businessman in the grey suit who had been standing directly behind Naya in the queue, had done more than just watch. He had recorded the entire interaction in high-definition 4K video. He hadn't intervened physically, fearing he might escalate the violence. But he had done something arguably more powerful. He had hit upload the moment Sterling was led away in cuffs. The video, titled "Power Tripping Security Guard Assaults Surgeon at JFK," had amassed 12 million views before Nia even turned her phone back on. When she finally disabled airplane mode, her phone nearly crashed from the sheer volume of notifications. The hashtags #Dr. Nia and #Fire Sterling were trending worldwide, sandwiching the latest celebrity gossip. The comments section was a digital war zone, but the vast majority of the troops were on Nia's side. They dissected Sterling's sneer, his illegal demand for papers without cause, and the deeply satisfying moment Richard Calloway walked out of the elevator like an avenging angel. However, Greg Sterling wasn't going down without a fight. Sterling had made bail the next morning. Sitting in his small, cramped apartment in Queens, he made a fatal error. Instead of staying silent, keeping his head down, and letting his lawyer handle the fallout, his ego took the wheel. He felt humiliated, and humiliation often breeds a dangerous kind of defensiveness. He called a friend who ran a fringe men's rights podcast called The Alpha Zone, thinking he could spin the narrative before the mainstream media crucified him. He thought he could find a sympathetic audience who would believe that he was the victim of a woke billionaire and an angry, entitled woman. "I was just doing my job, plain and simple." Sterling whined into the microphone during the live stream, his voice tinny over the phone connection. "She didn't look like she belonged in that line. You know the type. Aggressive, loud. I was protecting the perimeter for the other passengers. Then she starts screaming and suddenly her husband comes down and throws his money around. It's reverse discrimination. I'm the one being punished for doing police work. It was the worst possible move he could have made. Richard Calloway was sitting in his glass-walled London office, watching the live stream on a tablet. His legal team from the prestigious firm, Sterling and Hale, sat around him in silence. Richard's face was stone, his eyes cold and calculating. "He's defaming her," Richard said calmly, his voice devoid of emotion, but heavy with intent. "He's calling my wife aggressive to an audience of thousands, after the video clearly shows her standing still with her hands up. He is doubling down on the lie." "We can send a cease and desist, sir," his lead attorney suggested. "No," Richard said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "A letter is too slow. He wants to play the victim. Let's show the world exactly what kind of victim he is. Release the footage." "Which footage, sir?" "All of it," Richard commanded. The internal security camera angles from the check-in desk, the high-definition feed with the audio overlay. Let the world hear exactly what he whispered to her when he thought no one was listening. Stratos Airlines released the official security tape 1 hour later. The audio was crisp. It didn't leave room for interpretation. The world heard Sterling whisper, "Lottery winner, rapper's girlfriend." They heard him say, "It's a crime to lie to security." They heard the sickening crunch of Naya's phone being kicked across the floor, and they heard the fear in her voice as she asked for her husband. The podcast interview backfired instantly. The comments on Sterling's live stream turned from too supportive to vicious. Titan Security. The company that had employed Sterling saw the writing on the wall. They issued a public apology within minutes and announced they were suing Sterling for breach of contract and damaging their brand reputation. They washed their hands of him publicly. But the internet sleuths weren't done. Within 24 hours, users on Reddit had dug into Sterling's past. They found complaints from 3 other women at his previous job as a nightclub bouncer. All minority women, all claiming he had used excessive force and derogatory language. He had been fired quietly from that job too, but the records had been buried. Sterling wasn't just a man who had a bad day. The released footage proved he was a predator who had finally been caught on a stage too big to hide on. His defense had crumbled, and the real punishment was just beginning. The months following the incident at JFK were a slow-motion car crash for Greg Sterling. When the handcuffs had clicked onto his wrists that morning, he had been terrified. But by the time he made bail 24 hours later, fear had been replaced by a toxic, delusional anger. He sat in his small, cluttered living room in Queens, the blinds drawn to keep out the prying lenses of the paparazzi camped on his sidewalk. His wife Linda had taken the kids to her mother's house in Ohio 3 days after the video went viral. She couldn't handle the death threats, the shame, or the fact that her husband had become the face of discrimination on the evening news. Sterling was alone. He drank cheap beer and scrolled through the comments on the video, his face illuminated by the blue light of his laptop. He deserves jail time. Bully with a badge. I hope he loses everything. They don't know me, Sterling muttered to the empty room, crushing the can in his hand. They don't know what it's like. I was protecting the perimeter. She provoked me. He had convinced himself of this lie. He had found a lawyer, a man named Arthur Vane, who advertised on late-night television and smelled of desperation and old cigars. Vane had promised Sterling that they could turn this around. He told Sterling that Richard Calloway was a rich bully who was using his influence to crush a working-class hero. We don't settle, Vane had told him, tapping a greasy pen on his desk. "We countersue. Wrongful termination. Defamation of character. We make them pay you to go away." It was the worst advice Greg Sterling ever received. The courtroom. 6 months later, the Civil Court of New York was a theater of war. The air conditioning was humming, but Sterling was sweating through his ill-fitting grey suit. On the other side of the aisle sat Nia Calloway. She looked impeccable in a sharp navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a dignified bun. Beside her was Richard, silent and imposing, and their attorney, Evelyn St. Clair. St. Clair was a shark in a silk blouse, known for tearing defendants apart with a smile. Arthur Vane Sterling's lawyer stood up to make his opening statement. He tried to paint a picture of a chaotic airport, a stressed security guard, and an entitled passenger who refused to follow simple orders. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Vane wheezed, "Greg Sterling is a man who has given 10 years of his life to public safety. On that day, he saw a suspicious individual. He made a judgment call. Was he polite? Maybe not. Is being rude a crime punishable by financial ruin? We say no." Sterling nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. Exactly, he thought. "I just did my job." Then Evelyn St. Clair stood up. She didn't use flowery language. She didn't pace the room. She simply walked to the podium and placed a single thumb drive on the lectern. "We aren't here to discuss politeness," St. Clair said, her voice cutting through the room like a diamond cutter. "We are here to discuss malice. We are here to prove that Mr. Sterling didn't make a mistake. He made a choice to target, a choice to humiliate, and a choice to assault." The trial lasted 3 days. The prosecution brought out the check-in agent, Sarah. She testified through tears, describing how terrified she was of Sterling, how he had bullied staff members for years. Then came the expert witnesses. A forensic audio engineer had isolated the whispers from the security footage. The courtroom sat in dead silence as the audio played over the high-quality speakers. Lottery winner. Rapper's girlfriend. The jury. A diverse group of 12 New Yorkers looked at Sterling with undisguised disgust. Sterling shrank in his seat. It sounded worse in the quiet courtroom than it had in his head. But the killing blow came when St. Clair called Sterling to the stand. Sterling walked up, swearing to tell the truth. He tried to look the jury in the eye, but he couldn't hold their gaze. "Mr. Sterling," St. Clair began, holding a file folder, "you claimed in your deposition that Dr. Calloway was physically aggressive and that you feared for your safety. Is that correct?" "Yes," Sterling said, his voice tight. "She was reaching into her bag. I didn't know if she had a weapon." "A weapon?" St. Clair repeated. "At a TSA screened airport terminal." "Interesting." She opened the file. "Mr. Sterling, were you aware that we subpoenaed the employment records from your previous job at the nightclub Velvet?" Sterling froze. His lawyer, Vane, looked up sharply. They hadn't expected this. I worked there for a few months," Sterling stammered. "And why were you fired, Mr. Sterling?" "I resigned," he lied. "Objection," St. Clair said calmly. "Perjury. I have here a sworn affidavit from the owner of Velvet, along with 3 separate police reports filed in 2019. She walked toward him, holding the papers like a weapon. 3 women, all women of color, all claiming that you physically restrained them and refused them entry despite them having valid tickets. One of them, a Ms. Davis, suffered a sprained wrist. Does that sound familiar?" "That was a misunderstanding," Sterling shouted, standing up in the witness box. "They were drunk. They were causing trouble. Just like Dr. Calloway was causing trouble. St. Clair asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is it your testimony, Mr. Sterling, that every time a successful minority woman crosses your path, she is causing trouble? I am not a racist, Sterling yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. I am a good man. She thinks she's better than me just because her husband owns the damn planes. The outburst echoed off the mahogany walls. Sterling realized too late what he had said. He had admitted his motivation wasn't safety. It was resentment. It was jealousy. St. Clair smiled a cold, predatory smile. No further questions, Your Honor. The verdict. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, Sterling held his breath. He was praying for a miracle. He was praying for a hung jury. In the matter of Calloway v. Sterling, the foreman read, we find the defendant liable on all counts: assault, battery, false imprisonment, and defamation. Sterling felt the blood drain from his legs. We award the plaintiff compensatory damages in the amount of $50,000, the foreman continued. Okay, Sterling thought, his heart hammering. 50 grand. I can declare bankruptcy. I can handle that. And, the foreman said, taking a breath, due to the malicious nature of the defendant's conduct and his lack of remorse, we award punitive damages in the amount of $450,000. $500,000. Sterling's head spun. The room tilted. $500,000. He didn't have it. He would never have it. The Judge Justice Moore looked down at him. Mr. Sterling, you treated a fellow human being as less than dirt. Now the law will treat your bank account with the same severity. Judgment is entered. Court is adjourned. Naya and Richard stood up. They hugged their lawyer. They didn't even look at Sterling. He was a ghost to them now. A problem solved. The long fall. The decline was rapid and brutal. Arthur Vane sued Sterling for unpaid legal fees, taking the last $5,000 Sterling had in his savings. The court garnished his wages, not that he had any wages to garnish yet. He lost the apartment in Queens. The landlord didn't want the drama, and Sterling couldn't pay the rent. He moved into a dingy studio basement in Jersey City, a place that smelled of damp mold and despair. He applied for security jobs. Rejected. He applied for warehouse work. Rejected. He applied to drive a delivery truck. Rejected. Every background check pulled up the video. Every employer saw the airport racist. He was radioactive. His wife filed for divorce. She won full custody of the kids. The judge in the family court cited Sterling's unstable temperament and financial ruin as reasons to limit his visitation to supervised monthly meetings. He hadn't seen his children in 8 months. He sold his car. He sold his watch. He sold the collection of baseball cards he had kept since childhood. Finally, a friend of a cousin took pity on him. He knew a guy running a taxi dispatch center near JFK. It was off the books, grueling work, bottom of the barrel. You're a dispatcher? Sterling asked, hopeful. No, the cousin said. You're a loader. You stand at the curb, you load bags, you whistle for the cabs. Minimum wage plus tips. Take it or leave it. Sterling took it. The reunion. It had been 14 months since the incident. November in New York was unforgiving. The wind whipped off Jamaica Bay, cutting through layers of clothing like a knife. The rain was a relentless, freezing drizzle that turned the airport pavement into a stick grey mirror. Greg Sterling stood at the taxi stand of Terminal 4. He was wearing a neon yellow vest over a cheap, waterlogged hoodie. His boots were leaking. His hands were chapped and raw from handling hundreds of wet suitcases without gloves. He was exhausted. His back ached constantly. He had aged 10 years in one. The arrogance that used to puff out his chest was gone, replaced by a permanent slump of defeat. "Taxi need a taxi," he shouted, his voice hoarse. He waved a yellow cab forward, opening the door for a businessman who didn't even look at him, just shoved a suitcase at Sterling's chest. "Trunk!" the man barked. "Yes, sir," Sterling muttered, heaving the heavy bag into the trunk. The man didn't tip. Sterling wiped the rain from his eyes and turned back to the line of passengers. "Next," he called out. A black town car had pulled up to the curb, but it seemed to be having engine trouble. The driver was out looking under the hood. The passenger, a woman, stepped out to find alternative transport. She walked toward the taxi line, her heels clicking rhythmically on the wet concrete. She was dressed in a stunning cream-colored wool coat, holding a large umbrella that shielded her from the misery of the weather. She carried herself with an elegance that made the chaotic airport seem to slow down around her. Sterling hurried over. "Miss, I can get you a cab right here, front of the line." He was hoping for a good tip. He needed to pay his electric bill. He reached for her bag, a familiar vintage leather bag. "Let me get that for you," he said, keeping his head down to keep the rain out of his eyes. "Thank you," the woman said. Her voice. It stopped him cold. It was a voice he heard in his nightmares, a voice he had heard on a loop in the courtroom. Sterling slowly lifted his head. Rainwater dripped from the brim of his cheap baseball cap onto his nose. He was looking directly into the eyes of Dr. Nia Calloway. She looked even more successful than before. She was glowing, radiant, unbothered. She wasn't angry. She wasn't fearful. She looked at him with a calm, penetrating recognition. Sterling froze. His hands began to shake just like they had when he held the phone for Richard. The shame that washed over him was hotter than fire. He wanted the ground to open up and swallow him whole. He wanted to run, but he couldn't move. "Dr. Calloway," he whispered. The sound was barely audible over the roar of jet engines overhead. Nia looked at the man in the yellow vest. She took in the hollow cheeks, the desperate eyes, the cracked hands. She saw the name tag pinned crookedly to his vest. Greg. She didn't smile. That would have been cruel. She didn't scold him. That would have been unnecessary. Life had already scolded him enough. "Mr. Sterling," she replied, her tone neutral. Sterling stammered. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Look at what you did to me." None of it seemed right. "I'm working the stand today." "I see that," she said. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the rain. "I lost everything," Sterling blurted out. It was a plea for pity, a reflex. Nia tilted her head slightly. "You lost what you took for granted, Greg. You used your power to make people feel small. Now you know what it feels like to be small." She stepped closer, not aggressively, but with purpose. "I set up a scholarship with the money from the lawsuit," she told him. 4 young women from Queens are going to medical school this year. Because of you. Your arrogance paid for their future. So in a way, you finally did something good." Sterling felt tears prick his eyes, mixing with the rain. It was a devastating blow. His ruin was their success. A taxi pulled up. Sterling instinctively reached for the door handle, his training taking over. He opened it for her. He looked at her bag, the Birkin he had thrown on the floor a year ago. He treated it like it was made of glass this time, placing it gently on the back seat. "Safe travels, Dr. Calloway," he choked out, stepping back. Nia paused before getting in. She reached into her purse. Sterling's heart skipped a beat. Was she going to tip him? The irony would crush him. She pulled out a card. It wasn't money. It was a business card for a mental health clinic in the city that offered pro bono counseling for anger management. "Money won't fix you, Greg," she said softly, pressing the card into his wet, dirty hand. "But this might. Do it for your kids. Maybe one day they'll want to see their father again." She got into the cab. The door slammed shut. Sterling stood there, water soaking through his shoes, holding the card. He watched the taxi merge into traffic, its taillights blurring in the downpour. "Hey, buddy, wake up," a tourist shouted behind him. "Are you going to load these bags or what?" Greg Sterling wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked at the card, then tucked it into his pocket right next to his heart. "Yeah," he said, his voice breaking. "Yeah, I'm loading them. I'm coming." He bent down, picked up the heavy suitcase, and went back to work. And that, my friends, is the heavy price of hubris. Greg Sterling spent years thinking he was the king of the castle, only to end up as the servant at the gate. It's a harsh truth, but a necessary one. The energy you put into the world has a funny way of finding its way back to you. Nia Calloway didn't just win a lawsuit. She turned a moment of hatred into a lifetime of opportunity for others. If this story satisfied your craving for justice, please smash that like button. It helps get these stories to more people. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss the next episode of Karma Strikes Back. What would you have done if you were Nia? Would you have given him the card, or would you have walked away? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be kind, and remember someone is always watching.